All right, chat. One of the greats, Michael Moore, talking on Al Jazeera about the Israeli-Gaza war. If you ever be like, what's an example of somebody who hides their power level? Michael Moore. Michael Moore is that guy. He's kind of like, I admire him because he does cringe shit. He does live cringe shit. But when he has the opportunity to tack more to the left, he does. So even though he's to my right, he has been basically out there on his own trying to make America suck less for decades. And I admire that.
During his visit to Israel following the October 7th attacks, U.S. President Joe Biden warned the country not to repeat the mistakes the U.S. made in response to the 9/11 attacks. But is Israel doing just that? And why is the U.S. refusing to call for a ceasefire? I'll ask the director of the award-winning film Fahrenheit 9/11, author and activist Michael Moore, in an Upfront special. Michael Moore, thanks so much for joining me on Upfront.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. You, of course, made a very famous movie called Fahrenheit 9/11, which criticized the U.S.'s response to the attacks of September 11, 2001. You chronicled the panicked rush to allow the government to spy on its own citizens, the decision to invade Iraq, a country that had nothing to do with 9/11, and the ways that the defense industry profited off the war. Israel is now calling October 7th their own 9/11. What do you make of that comparison, and do you see similarities or parallels to how the Israelis are responding?
Well, it's ironically, it's a very apt description in the sense in terms of how the United States responded to 9/11 and how Israel is responding now. And I think President Biden, both when he was there and since he's come back to the United States, has essentially said, don't make the mistakes that we made. That we were very much in a rush toward revenge.
Well, this is why I love Michael Moore. He is, I bet you if you gave him a beer and he said Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a fucking dipshit, he would agree with you 100%. But he also understands wine moms and libs are the base of the Democratic Party. So you have to have their dumbass shibboleths, or else you come across as a Bernie bro.
We were everybody here, anybody who remembers that day, it was frightening. It was a sense of pretty much, I'm guessing how most Israelis have felt for many years. Something like this would never happen. And then it happens. And the fact that it took hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours before help arrived, I think has discombobulated a lot of people in a sense of kind of utter horror and fear. Human beings do not act well when they come from a place of fear and terror. That's why a lot of times terrorism does its job. But I want to say that waking up that morning, that Saturday morning on October 7th, it's never a good day on this planet when you wake up and you hear that 1,400 of our Jewish brothers and sisters have been slaughtered. It's none of us, I think, want to live in that world. And so I think I understand all the initial responses, and I understand the response and the desire for revenge, having gone through that time and seen all the mistakes we made, as you said, by first invading Afghanistan, then invading Iraq. For what?
That's the interesting question, the for what? The what was this really about question in regard to 9/11 led people to say, okay, this was maybe just a pretext. for invading Iraq.
Well, I mean, it was okay. Okay, before we get into that, the answer to that is 9/11 was a public bloody nose to the American empire. If a bunch of ragtag guys could hijack civilian planes and cause devastation in the financial capital of the United States, New York, and the political capital of the United States, Washington, D.C., it could put us all into fear, then the power of the American superpower isn't that strong. So the United States of America had to respond to maintain its superpower status. Now, Bush saw it as an opportunity as a neocon to spread and to initiate more wars across the world while the American people were still in a state of xenophobic, Islamophobic fear. So it was a combination of a superpower got their nose bloodied, they'd have to respond, and neocons using it as a pretext.
Iraq, do you worry that
just like how 10/7 was humiliating for the IDF? Exactly.
Similarly used October 7th as a pretext to take over more of Gaza, to expand in the West Bank, or maybe go to war with Iran? Could this moment of horror and fear turn into an opportunistic moment for something else?
Well, I think it already has. And let me just say this, and this is what maybe one issue that most people on the right or the left, pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian, pro-human life, and I think, I'm guessing just the polls I've seen just out of Israel, Netanyahu has to go. The people were not protected. What was he doing? Why had they pulled the army back? Why? We know one reason they were pulled back into the West Bank was to support the settlers and their violence against the Palestinians. I mean, he's going to have to answer for this. It's not going to go well for him, and I think that it's very hard to trust things that are coming out of his administration. And
wow. Joe Biden is just as bad as I thought he was. I searched up Biden vote on my Twitter just to see what I've been saying over the years. And god damn it, does it suck to be right. Fuck. God damn, does it fucking suck to be right.
The slaughter that we're witnessing now is so, I don't know how to put words to it, frankly. I mean, just what's happened the last few nights, but really what's happened the last few decades. And that I, as an American, I'm helping to fund that. The United States is the bank.
Let me ask you about that funding, Michael. That's so important, right? Because on the one hand, as you mentioned earlier, President Biden says, hey, Israel, don't make the mistakes we made. We went looking for justice and we made mistakes. At the same time, he's asking for more military aid. He said that, innocents being killed is just the price of waging a war. You can't square that circle easily. What do you do? What should the U.S. be doing?
Well, we should not be trying to increase the slaughter. We should not be funding the war. I think, most Americans have no problem with making sure that there are no more Israelis killed and providing for the defense. But that's really not what's going on right now. How do you justify the slaughter of children? And some of these nights, half of the dead, half of the wounded are children. What are we getting back? What are we trying to do? What did the children do? And how are we defending Israel by having more dead children? And anybody who can't say right now, especially people who say, "Oh, I support Israel and I will, defend Israel," and then support and fund the massacre of innocent civilians and children. You have no credibility then when you say that you support Israel.
Well, that kind of hypocrisy, that kind of contradiction isn't just with people, it's with governments too, including our government. I mean, Human Rights Watch put it perfectly. They said the hypocrisy and double standards of Western states are flagrant and obvious, and that, of course, the U.S. and other Western governments have to apply the same principles regarding Russian atrocities in Ukraine as they would with, quote, Israel's brutal disregard for civilian life in Gaza. It seems like we pick and choose when we're going to be outraged, when we're going to intervene, when we're going to have a moral critique. Would it be fair to say that the U.S.
I mean, where are the shipments of anti-air and anti-tank rockets to Palestine?
Foreign policy position is fundamentally hypocritical?
It is, but I think what's really at the core always of our foreign policy is what's best for us. And so Israel.
Well, no. It's not what's best for us, Michael. It's what's best for the military-industrial complex. It's what's best for American-aligned capital. It has nothing to do with what's best for America. It's not what's best for the United States. It's not what's best for the American citizen. This makes us profoundly unsafe.
And from the very beginning of the creation of Israel, the American government and the American military has always seen this as a good thing for us, that we have this base there, that we have all the kind of intelligence apparatus and everything, all the things that Israel does basically to make sure that the oil supply is there in the Middle East. We're not going to be impeded by this. And I think too, and I've had Israeli friends say to me, we get that what's really behind this, either politically or militarily wise, the United States has been using Israel in that way for many, many years.
Another thing that comes to mind, though, is the role that the media plays. And again, I think back to your work. In 9/11, the media helped beat the drum for war, post 9/11. They beat the drum for war in Iraq. They beat the drum for war in Afghanistan. They continue to beat those war drums. Similarly, today, we see the media adopting pro-Israel approach, pro-war approach, not as uniformly as post 9/11. There are voices urging caution. There's social media, which is far more complicated and diverse and sometimes messy. But at least we see more dissent than we did 20 years ago. Has the media learned a lesson? Have we learned a lesson from before?
I think so. I think because of the what's still going on back and forth about the hospital that was bombed. Was it an Israeli rocket? Was it a Palestinian rocket? That'll all come out, by the way. We will all know the truth of everything.
Yeah.
I'm confident of that. But in the meantime, the New York Times and the others have had to sort of back away from, we got to make sure we're not, we have to say every time anything that comes out of Gaza now from the Palestinians, we have to say, oh, this has not been independently confirmed. And we should all know that anyways as consumers of media. But I still don't hear anybody in the media, whenever something comes out of Netanyahu's mouth, whatever his government is saying, it should also be have the caveat attached to it. We have not been able to independently confirm what Benjamin Netanyahu is saying. And so we're in the fog of all this right now, and we don't know a lot of what, but everything that he and his government, very right-wing government, has been saying and doing must be treated with a lot of skepticism.
Absolutely, and it's a right-wing government, and so sometimes with right-wing governments, right-wing media outlets are very gentle. The thing about this case is that it's not just the right-wing media that's not being sufficiently critical. It's everybody.
Exactly.
Look at supposedly centrist mainstream media outlets like CNN. I mean, they're still branding their TV coverage Israel at war, which seems to be taking sides. It doesn't feel very neutral to me. A BBC headline about an Israeli attack on Jabalia mentioned the massive crater the strike left, but they ignored the more than 50 people that the Gazan health ministry says were also killed. Mainstream media makes all kinds of dubious decisions about how to frame a conflict.
It's pretty clear that they're on the Israeli side. It's not. There's nobody on the side of Palestinians in mainstream media. When a person who supports Palestinian freedom is interviewed, the first question they're asked is, do you condemn Hamas? Have you ever heard anybody say, do you condemn the IDF? They've killed far more and far more children.
And you know very well as a filmmaker that the way you frame a story is how people understand the story. How have people's perceptions been influenced by the way the media has framed this?
Well, I think very much so. But again, the majority of Americans don't support the slaughter.
Yeah.
And they want the humanitarian aid in now, not 20 trucks a day or 50 trucks a day, 500 trucks a day. That is where the American people are at. And I want people around the world who might be listening to this to understand that my fellow Americans actually kind of do get this. And when the big graphics come on the screen, Israel at war, you know, you just have to stop and think for a second. Oh, yeah, the Palestinians, they have all those fighter jets. They have all those bombers. The big Palestinian Navy with all those
right, right.
When you say the word war, what does define war? You know, it's there was an attack on October 7th that was reprehensible, and so people have a right to defend themselves, but that's not what's going on now. If you're killing children in my name with my money, that's not a war to defend yourself. That looks like something else. That looks like that there's a group.
Chat, if somebody is going to be noticed, if I'm going to bring on a content creator to criticize on my stream, they have to have a minimum of 200 viewers. Other than that, it feels like bullying. It feels like bullying when I punch down so far. It feels bad. So I will not be talking about what's his face? I can't remember his name. You know, like I need to be talking about somebody like Ben Shapiro or somebody who has an actual influence on the conversation. I don't want to punch down so far. Especially when you're talking about somebody whose family's in the IDF. They're not persuadable. You know, they're going to defend whatever crimes are committed. So, no.
Group of people, 2 to 2.5 million people of color.
Have I talked about the Tacoma port blockade efforts? We talked about it a little bit earlier. But it seems like it's we watched something on it. Well, we didn't spend a lot of time on it, but it's good direct action. You love to see it.
That are being pushed, as they say, into the sea.
They're going around to multiple streamers trying to farm clout. They better start working hard. Like, damn. Better get to work. Because it doesn't seem to be working.
Or into the desert, or to get rid of them in some way. Certainly is what it looks like. And you can't wake up every morning and see the bodies of these dead children being pulled from the rubble.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of what Netanyahu is doing was very similar to what Bush was doing. He messed up. Bush paid no attention. They knew an attack was going to happen. They didn't prepare for it. And now then Bush tried to save himself by, let's go to war. Let's, let's defend America. and yet we're not any safer now as Americans than we were back then. And yes, there hasn't been another quote 9/11 here in the U.S., but none of us are safe if our response is more killing and more death.
Well, look, I'm looking at Biden's request from Congress for more money. It seems like more killing and more death is inevitable. Biden's asked Congress for $14 billion for Israel's defense. The U.S. already provides Israel more than $3 billion a year. He's also asked for more money for Ukraine, on top of the tens of billions of dollars that's already being spent in the fight against Russia. Now, what's interesting to me is when Biden made the case for this spending, he did more than just make a moral argument. He did more than just make a political argument. He made an economic argument. On October 19th, he talked about the number of U.S. states that those weapons would be made in.
Weapons are waste. Bombs are pure waste. All the resources you put into a bomb is fucking waste.
As if to say, this isn't just good for defense.
It's like smashing windows and going, wow, I'm housing people as new windows are made. What's the economic consequence of millions of new radicalized youths gunning for the greatest country on earth? It's not good, folks. You know, one thing that I think people, need to understand is like technology is democratizing. And the more technology democratizes, the more power individual groups are going to have to generate damage.
This is a jobs program. What do you think of the argument that making more weapons is also good for the average working American?
We don't fall for that anymore. The majority of people don't fall for that. And I got to tell you, Biden, the things that he said in the sort of position he's taken, I'm pretty sure what he's doing privately behind the scenes with Netanyahu. And I know they tried to slow things down a bit to try to get humanitarian aid in, to try and get hostages released. And I would say, I just want to say to people in Gaza, anybody who's holding hostages, release them now. It's not just in terms of the goodwill that will come from that, but do it because it's just right. It's the right thing to do. And know, again, as the Israeli press has informed us, when they started to release the first 4 hostages a week or so ago, and I think I heard one spokesperson for the IDF say, this is all just PR, them releasing hostages. Wow, what's that thing we learned when we were kids, that when you accuse me of something, it's quite a sign. It may be what you're doing too. And it's release the hostages, hold the...
Man, it's so clear that Michael Moore is trying to walk that line. This is what you have to realize, chat. This is an issue that is unlike almost any other. There are dedicated, paid state apparatuses set up to go after people that oppose Israel. It's socialism or barbarism, aristocracy, kidology, loner box, they're trash. I mean, those are people that are just chasing a small number of how do I put this? Not intelligent, dishonest, and desperate. That's all you have to know. Like, can you imagine talking about the history of Gaza and not talking about the ethnic cleansing, the Nakba? That Israeli scholars have confirmed. Just pathetic.
Rug out from underneath the Netanyahu government that's trying to justify the massacre of children. I would just strongly encourage that, and to say both sides have to have a ceasefire. The killing has to stop.
There was a moment last week that, I got to be honest with you, still is sitting in my craw also. Last week, the White House press secretary was asked if President Biden thinks anti-Israel protesters are extremists. Rather than answer the question, she called the protesters anti-Semitic and compared them to neo-Nazis who marched in Charlottesville back in 2017. There's an obvious divide on the left between supporters of Israel and supporters of Palestinians. But this is a Democratic White House calling critics of Israeli policy, who on most other issues would probably be allies, anti-Semites. What do you say to people like the press secretary who make those kinds of claims?
My podcast team, my producers, went down to Grand Central Station in New York City on Friday night at rush hour because we'd heard rumors that people, it was going to be like a flash mob, or people were going to show up there during rush hour to kind of shut Grand Central down. And when we got there, what it was it was an organization called Jewish Voice for Peace. And packed inside of Grand Central were well over 1,000, mostly New York Jews, sitting down and expecting to be arrested in an act of civil disobedience, wearing T-shirts saying, ceasefire now, not in my name.
Yeah.
New people had family members who had been killed on October 7th and wanted to make it clear that their deceased loved one would not want children being killed because they were killed.
Yeah.
It was, and so the call, I saw that. So I said, so basically you're calling these thousands of Jews in New York City anti-Semites? I mean, really, you're really working the PR machine hard when you're calling fellow Jews awful terms like that. So it's not going to work. And I think this is very frustrating for Israel, the Israeli government, that, we've had a couple of generations of young people, not just in the US, but in Israel and in Palestine and around the world, where they kind of get what's going on now. And so you're just not going to be able to make stuff up. And I'm very disappointed in President Biden for using this language. But I got to say, in the back of my head, and I have nothing to back this up on, I just think that publicly Biden has taken this position that, we're 1,000% behind Israel and we're going to send as many weapons as possible and this and that, whatever. But I think behind the scenes and in his phone calls with Netanyahu, and just
oh God, no, don't, no, Michael, no, don't do the copium, man, don't do the copium. I think this is part of a strategy. This is my cope. Michael Moore occasionally does stuff like this, where he does this thing where he's like, listen, I believe they're doing the right thing in their hearts, as a way of trying to give those people the space to make that decision. But in this moment, nah, man. Nah, dude. You can't allow yourself to think that. Joe Biden is a piece of shit.
Reading some of the analysis of all this from Israeli.
There have certainly been some leaks. There have been some policy experts who've weighed in on this and said absolutely that it's not nearly as uniform a position in the United States and Israel as it looks publicly. But there's something.
And we know, and publicly, Biden doesn't like Netanyahu. He's made that
right.
clear. Netanyahu was in New York just 6-7 weeks ago for the annual UN meetings. And Netanyahu was upset that he did not get an invitation like Zelensky and others did when they were in the U.S. Hey, come on down to D.C., come to the White House, all that. Biden didn't want anything. They had a perfunctory little 2 chairs there at the UN, and they sat side by side for a minute, he and Netanyahu, and then that was it. He was not welcome at the White House. I was a supporter of Bernie Sanders, but I voted for Biden. And I have been one time, many times over, very kind of surprised and happy with the things that Biden has done since he's been president to help the people, to help the poor, to stand with unions. I've never seen a president go to a union march or demonstration to support the union against the automakers. So I think that we'll know more in the months or years to come.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you speak to that because it makes me think about the future or the potential future of the left. And before you go, I just want to ask you this. You were an avatar of progressive politics long before people knew who a Bernie Sanders was or who an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was. Now there are podcasts about the end of neoliberalism, and more people are joining DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, than ever before.
One thing, let me say this. Biden going to the UAW was a good optics move for him. But what he's done on this Israeli genocide has lost all goodwill. And that is the reality. There's no way he's going to get out of this clean. Biden administration officials say Israel's counterattack against Hamas has been too severe and too costly, but they are unable to exert significant influence on him. Okay. The Biden administration is planning a $320 million transfer of precision bombs for Israel. That's what he's doing.
Unions are experiencing their highest levels of public support in decades. To your point, Bernie almost got the Democratic nomination for president as a self-identified socialist. I mean, there is a vocal contingent in Congress right now that identifies as progressive. We are in a different moment. Are you satisfied with the gains made by the left in this country?
Yes and no. I mean, the gains are not far enough. I mean, we saw during the pandemic, because of all of the federal support and help for people, poverty amongst children was cut in half. And I'm not the only one who thought at the time, well, why don't we just keep this going? Look what we've done just by providing help to those.
Well, you see, we were told that they were going to pass it twice. Why do we need to do it? Why would we? Hey, we're going to do it temporarily and then we'll pass it again. Twice. And everybody who isn't a complete fucking moron said, why would you do that? In fact, Mitt Romney came forward and said, I want to make it permanent. What Joe Biden did was to the right of Mitt Romney.
Who need it. And, and then of course, because he's a more of a moderate, Biden has had to, he doesn't kept a lot of that aid going. But I think that young people get it. They're the ones behind the new union movement in this country. You've got over 300, 400 Starbucks have been organized, have voted in the union. And of course, they're fighting that, and as they always do. But this is all young people doing this. And it is young people who are standing up for the Palestinian people, but also will stand up for it. They're focusing a lot on the few kind of crazy people that are bigots. A thing like this, Israel, what they've been doing, playing into the hands of bigots, and that's kind of white supremacist support. But that is not this country now. And the right wing will not run the show here. Again, I really believe in that. I don't believe Trump's going to get elected back into the White House. There are so many millions of Americans who have not liked the way that we've gone. And in closing, I just want to say thank you for all the people who stand for peace in Israel, especially. Thank you. And to all here in this country. I'm weirdly optimistic. Maybe I shouldn't be, but I just don't think Netanyahu and his gang are going to get away with this. And I think that the slaughter will end. And maybe not soon enough.
Michael, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you.
Thank you for letting me speak. And it's I think this is the first television interview I've been asked to do since this started on October 7th. So my sincere grief and condolences to everyone who has died first on October 7th. Just nobody who's Jewish should have to spend another day on this earth worried about their survival. And then immediately, we need to stop the slaughter in Gaza. The hostages have to be returned, and sensible people who care about peace and care about each other have to sit down at a table and work this out. And, you know, we say a prayer for all.
Absolutely.
So that not another person has to die.
Indeed. Everybody, Michael Moore, thanks again for joining us. Everybody, that's our show. Up Front, we'll be back next week.
So this is what Biden is trying to do to counter the loss of young people and people of color. Expect a more aggressively left-wing second term. Oh yeah? What are we promising, man? Oh, this is from Jonathan Turley. Oh no, never mind. Never mind, chat. Never mind. Forget that. That's from Jonathan Turley.